torn some pages out of an old Vanity Fair magazine that all have areas of blue in them somewhere. And that's what I'm going to use because I'm going to do a sort of bluish background. And I have my 1 1/4 inch circle punch here. And I usually use my punches upside down so that I can see what I'm punching out. What I'm looking for is blue, but no text. And sometimes you sort of have to cut around to get close to the color that you need. Let's just get rid of a little bit of his arm so I can get in there. So I'm just going to punch a bunch of circles from all the blue areas of these magazine pages, and then I'll come back and show you what I do with them. So now I have a bunch of blue circles, and I'm just going to mix up so that they're not all from the same page, so that it's a lot of different blues. I think I have too many of this color. So I'm going to lay them on this background that I've set up that has text paper on it already. And I'm going to try and arrange this so that there's not a lot of the same color in a row. And I'm sort of lining up the textures on these punched pieces so that if there's anything linear, it's going in the same direction as the text, which is kind of nitpicky, but that's just how my brain works today. So you can really do it any way you want to, and there's nothing that says that you can't put two pieces that are the same color next to each other. I'm doing this in straight lines because I did the last background sort of randomly. But really you can do whatever you want with this. You could lay these circles down in random order. You could cut different size circles if you have different size circle punches. Whatever. There. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to take matte medium and kind of one row at a time lay them down. And these are kind of squiggly. They want to move around a lot. So you sort of have to stick your finger in the middle of the circle until you get enough medium on it that it doesn't want to lift up anymore. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work. And this is all cut from magazines, so chances are some or all of these are going to wrinkle. And people always ask me when they watch videos, what do you do when your paper wrinkles? And I don't do anything. I don't worry about it. It is what it is. It's going to wrinkle if it's going to wrinkle, and there's nothing I can do about it. So just call it texture and keep on going. And sometimes if it's like an enormous wrinkle in the middle of a face or something, I'll do my best to minimize it, but honestly, it is what it is. If I spent my whole day worrying about wrinkled magazine page pieces, I would never get a piece done. And if it's really something that's important, like a face, sometimes I will scan and reprint the images that I'm using on heavier paper, which seems to help. Part of the problem with magazine pages is that the paper is so thin that if you hold up a picture of liquid medium next to the magazine page, it will wrinkle. So printing on heavier paper does seem to help. And I know it seemed like I had lined these up in a perfectly straight line, in perfect order, and now I'm ignoring that. Mostly I just want to get the dots laid down so that they appear to be somewhat random, but the exact order doesn't really matter, because I'm going to cover this up with other stuff. You knew that, right? Of course there's going to be other layers to this. So now I'm going to do a coat over the top of this to make sure they stay where they belong. And while I have this out, I'm going to go ahead and coat the whole background. And the reason for that is this paper that's on the background, this text page background, is pretty porous. And the places in between the dots where I've laid down matte medium, that's going to make the paper less porous. So rather than putting up with background paper that absorbs the paint differently down here where there was no medium than it does in the middle right here where there was medium, I cover the whole thing with medium, and that way I'm painting over a layer of matte medium over the whole thing, and not a little matte medium over here and no matte medium over here. I hope that made sense. So now I'm going to let this dry and then come back with some paint. So now that this is mostly dry, it's still a little damp, but that's okay. I'm going to apply a little bit of gesso. Very little gesso. Just to sort of pull the text background and the circles together a little bit before I layer down some paint on top of them. Because they are a vastly different set of colors. The earth tone book pages and the blues of the circles are very different. And I also feel like these book pages are a little too visible, too readable, too something. They're too something. I would be happier with them if they weren't quite so right out of the book. So, a little bit of gesso. And I'm doing this sort of dabbing thing rather than stroking it all on so that I can get little bit less texture than applying it with long strokes like this gives me. And already the circles are starting to recede a little bit, and they're starting to blend together as a single color rather than the 3 or 4 different colors that I had. They really are just sort of pale blue shapes at this point. And I can make some of them paler. And now I'm going to let this dry, and then I'll come back with some paint. So now that the gesso is dry, I'm just going to add a little bit of really cheap acrylic and sort of apply this as a glaze. Just really light. And you can see that some of the circles are disappearing and some of them are a little more pronounced depending on how much gesso and how much paint I've put on them. There you go. So now I have a nice circle background to start layering my composition with. So I'll show you one more thing, and that is how to sort of back out of this paint while the paint is still damp. Can very gently lift a little bit of it off with a wet paper towel. So if you want to bring your circles back into focus, you can do it. You won't be able to get all the paint off, but you can get most of it off. And this is kind of fun for turning, especially with circles, turning them into sort of bubbles, because if you rub away the paint and create a highlight, they turn into little spheres and they look like bubbles. So, and you're really only getting down to the gesso layer because obviously that is already dry.